Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today we're asking, what does it mean to make art during times of conflict? How do artists and filmmakers carry that weight, confront those challenges, and use storytelling to help audiences understand, survive, and ultimately move forward? In short, how do we make art during war? To help us explore that complex question, we're joined by Abiram Brizuela, our guest moderator for this episode. Abi is a founding partner and head of the Artist Incubator at Antigravity Academy. He brings us this conversation as the first episode of a new season of our ongoing series of satellite sessions, and what a way to kick it off. Our regular host for this series, Carlos Lopez Estrada, is currently off shooting his new movie, and we're so grateful to Abi for stepping in to lead the conversation. We're excited to share this conversation with you thanks to our ongoing collaboration with Antigravity Academy and CAPE, the Coalition of Asian Pacifics in Entertainment. As usual, Abi is joined by an A-list panel of internationally acclaimed filmmakers, spanning both narrative and documentary filmmaking, to share their insights with us. But I'll let Abi take over the introductions from here.
Art takes on a new sense of urgency in times of conflict. Whether that conflict is global, political, or deeply personal, art has this unique purpose as a powerful platform to help us make sense of the world within and the world around us. Art during war. What a beautiful title, and what a complicated subject. So in this conversation, we're going to explore what it means to create work in moments of upheaval, the responsibility it carries, the challenges it presents, and the way storytelling can help us process, endure, and imagine a path forward. So today, we're joined by four groundbreaking, internationally acclaimed filmmakers whose work spans both narrative and documentary film. Each of them brings a sharp and essential perspective, using their craft as a vehicle for critical viewpoints and opening new ways of understanding ourselves and our social environment. So please join me in welcoming Cherien Dabis. Cherien is an Emmy-nominated filmmaker and actress known for her groundbreaking Arab American stories. Her last feature, All That's Left of You, premiered at Sundance in 2025 and went on to win major awards at San Francisco, Sydney, and Malaysia. It is Jordan's official submission for Best International Feature at the next Academy Awards. She made her debut with America, followed by May in the Summer. In television, she earned an Emmy nomination for Only Murders in the Building, as well as directing episodes for Ozark and Rami.
Thank you. Very happy to be here and loving all of the love that I see just floating up the screen. It's awesome.
This is so anti-gravity.
I'm feeling the love, guys. Thank you.
I really love the sense of community that revolves around independence.
I send it back.
So next we have Ramona Diaz. So Ramona is a Peabody, Gotham, IDA, Emmy, and PGA award-winning Filipino-American filmmaker. Her documentaries, including Imelda, Motherland, And So It Begins, and 1,000 Cuts have screened at Sundance, Berlin, Busan, Tribeca, South by Southwest, IDFA, and aired on PBS, Arte, and the BBC. I mean, who doesn't know Ramona? Ramona is incredible. As a Guggenheim and USA Fellow, she is also a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, as well as the PGA and WGA. How are you doing, Ramona?
I'm fine, Abby. Thank you for having me. It's really good to be here.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Gregory Nava. So Gregory is an Academy Award, Golden Globe, and Emmy-nominated filmmaker whose landmark work includes El Norte, Mi Familia, and Selena, three films now in the National Film Registry. That's not an easy thing to pull off. Gregory co-wrote Oscar-winning film Frida and created American Family for TV. He's also a co-founder of Film Independent and has been honored at Cannes, Sundance, and Berlin, and is currently developing a feature on labor and civil rights leader Dolores Huerta. Someone in the chat is saying a legend, and I would agree with that. Gregory, how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing great. I'm very excited to be here with you discussing this very serious and important topic, with this incredibly terrific panel. It's going to be a real pleasure for me, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Awesome. The last but not least panelist today is Bao Nguyen. Bao is an Emmy and Grammy nominated Vietnamese American filmmaker. His work explores the space between memory and myth. His award-winning films include Be Water, a personal favorite of mine. I mean, I think I saw Be Water on opening day and I absolutely loved it. The Greatest Night in Pop, also a favorite. And The Stringer, a Gold House A100 honoree and BAFTA US Breakthrough Artist. He is a partner at East Films and a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. So thank you all for being here tonight. Bao, how are you doing today?
I'm okay. I feel really honored to be part of this panel, and I can't wait to have a conversation. I think these are the moments where dialogue and conversation can really create a space for healing. So thank you for giving me this space.
Thank you. No, thank you all for being here and for sharing your perspectives with all today. I have so many questions that we're not gonna have time to go through everything. So I'm just gonna choose to be present and follow the conversation as it goes because I have the luxury of being, with four incredible minds. So let's see how this goes. And I'm gonna kick us off with a question that I know you've probably been asked a million times, but I'm really curious to see what that question looks like in a group setting right now. So it is widely known that in times of conflicts, many voices shape how events are later remembered, and this has been a source of social conflict over the years, and we all always know that journalists and activists and historians all play a role on how the story is told. So what do you think is the role of filmmakers in this dynamic? What do you think filmmakers are responsible for? And this is a question for everyone on the panel.
I think my role, okay, I'm just speaking for how I think what my role is. I think as a documentary filmmaker, I bear witness to history, right? And it's sort of a privileged position because I'm given this front row seat to life unfolding in front of me. And usually I film people who are actually main characters in history. So I'm there, I think, to bear witness. It's not to answer any questions. It's really just to present really more questions than answers. I'm really interested in questions and answers than definitive answers. So I think that's what my role is as a documentary filmmaker.
I guess just to add what Ramona said, I mean, bearing witness is such a privilege. I think for a long time it might be seen as a responsibility, but I think we're all in sort of this position to be privileged to be able to tell these stories and to be able to speak truth to power sometimes. I think for the longest time, especially, my parents were refugees from Vietnam, and for the longest time they felt like their experience, their memory of not just the Vietnam War, but their experience coming to America had no value because they didn't see it on screen. And so there's such a power of seeing your story on a big screen. And even, I did a film called The Stringer, and it is about the act of listening and bearing witness. And for so long, I think we have been viewed, many in the, marginalized community as victims and forced to endure rather than to witness, and transforming the idea of just being able to endure and becoming a witness of things is, I think, very powerful for us filmmakers.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think for me as a Palestinian American, I feel that my responsibility is to represent and to tell the stories that are being censored, erased from the history books, even if it means persecution, because I do what I do because I'm Palestinian. In fact, if I wasn't Palestinian, I'm not sure I would bother with this industry. Everything is so hard. But that's what fuels me. So it's a really big, it feels like this really weighty responsibility. I mean, thankfully there's more of us doing it now. So that takes some of the pressure off, because sometimes that can feel like a burden, like and it's like the burden of responsibility, especially when you feel like you're one of the only ones doing what you're doing, which is how I felt more like when I started. But now I absolutely think it's a privilege and an honor to be telling these stories, and it's so important. I don't think when you're from a group that's like actively being persecuted, I don't think that you can really rely on anything. I don't think you can rely on, mainstream media. You can't rely on Hollywood stories. Like you really, you kind of have to, there's a lot of story to tell because the story's not getting out there. So,
yes, I think that when we look at the question of filmmaking with respect to war, I think there's a couple of levels that we have to view. And one, of course, and probably the most where the most resources get put into is the propagandistic level. I mean, you see these films in World War II, Leni Riefenstahl, Veit Harlan making very positive films about Nazi Germany and the German war effort. You see Sergei Eisenstein, Alexander Nevsky, and all of his films making films that are very jingoistic and propagandistic for the Russian side of this war. You see Frank Capra's famous series, Why We Fight, and both during World War II, both documentaries like the Why We Fight series, John Huston's The Battle of San Pietro, William Wyler, Memphis Belle, and of course, all of the movies that are about, rah America fighting in this huge conflict. So those are all very propagandistic, and they're very much designed to energize their country to fight in a war. There's another level, and that is very, as Cherien has pointed out, Hollywood, the mainstream media, and these are all being done by filmmakers, and some very talented and very great filmmakers. And some of these films are masterpieces, like Alexander Nevsky by Sergei Eisenstein. But there's another level, and I think that's the level that everybody in this discussion is involved in, and that is the independent filmmakers. We are people that, as Bao said, try to speak truth to power, that we are seeking the truth. And what we're trying to do is to tell a human truth and get at the humanity of war and to build compassion for those who suffer unjustly in these conflicts. And normally, those kinds of movies are very hard to make. You have to be very dedicated to make them. And you really have to put your life on the line in order to get those stories out, because they are against what the societies involved want to see on the screen.
I just wanted to go back to the burden of representation, because I certainly, I think, was so intimidated by that early in my career. I actually, it made me not want to do work, because everyone, like people would tell me, you got to get it right, because you're the only Filipino American who's getting who's getting this platform, right? And I had to get over that burden of representation. I really did. Otherwise, it was like I didn't know what getting it right meant, right? Because then, who defines that? What is right? And so I really, in my head, had to just get over that hump and try not to think about it. Thank God, times have changed. It's been 20 years, so more Filipinos and Filipino Americans are telling our stories. And thank God for that. But when I started, I was the only one. It was the getting it right part that really was for me very debilitating as a filmmaker, as a storyteller. I just wanted to point that out.
No, I mean, this is so important. I want my next question to be a follow-up to that, because at least three of you are speaking about this. You're calling it a burden of representation, which is something that I personally relate to. I don't know. I think over the past 6 months, I've met with at least three Congress people in an advocacy effort for the importance of storytelling opportunities for youth in Los Angeles. And literally in all three instances, within 5 minutes, the moment they learn that I'm Venezuelan, they shift the conversation to ask me for political advice, as in I am a representative of Venezuela as a whole. but I think that has that has become a normalized expectation in the real world, right? And I think a lot of people assume that filmmakers are supposed to represent absolutely every single viewpoint for absolutely every single member of the community they are reflecting on a specific piece of work. So, I mean, when your work speaks for, or when you work in a community base, or in a way that, or in a storytelling cycle that represents a specific community or covers a specific community in a specific way, how do you handle that responsibility, and especially knowing that a single film cannot carry everything?
I think the responsibility is to the story, right? To be true to the story. You have to follow the story. It has to be genuine. And that's what I always tell myself. If I'm true to the story, I'll get there, right? So my very first film was about a lightning figure. I mean, she was a lightning rod, and it's still a very polarizing figure in the Philippines. I made my documentary film about Imelda Marcos, right? There was no way I could get that right, no matter what I did, right? Because I would hear from both sides that it wasn't enough of this or it wasn't enough of that. But I wanted to, the idea for that was just to have Imelda tell her truth. It was her truth and no one else's. But that was a hard pill to swallow.
Can I ask a follow-up contextual question, Gregory, on this point? Because to Ramona's point, as an audience member, I've been in situations where I just need to be presented with the fact, and I can reach my conclusion. And I guess anybody watching this conversation could also argue that the other half of the United States, whether or not they interact with editorial media in this case, also have access to the same exact information from the same source in the same framing, and choose not or even approach their own witnessing of reality from a layer of skepticism, whether or not the person has already lied. So in your own work or in your own process, what do you think that responsibility looks like or should look like?
What do I think? Well, I obviously, I'm not a documentarian. I'm a dramatic filmmaker. So, what I feel my responsibility is to tell the truth. All right. And about a particular situation that I feel very strongly about, like my film El Norte, which is, I grew up on the border. I've seen the situation my whole life with people trying to cross into the United States, being horribly unfairly treated. And the whole way this issue was seen as being a tremendous injustice being done to people, my people, So I made this film. I was burning with this passion to make this film El Norte because I saw our society pervaded with shadows who had no heart and soul, whose humanity was not embraced, not seen. And I wanted to give those shadows a heart and soul. I wanted to give a voice to the voiceless. And so I made El Norte. And the film had powerful impact when it was released, to the point that the United States, it brought the fact that there was a horrible war, a genocidal war against Mayan people in Guatemala that the United States didn't know about because it wasn't being reported on. And El Norte made suddenly everybody realize that this war was happening and that Mayan people were being killed by the hundreds of thousands in Guatemala. And so this suddenly became an issue. And the United States then, as a result of the success of the film El Norte, granted protective status to refugees from Central America and specifically Mayan people from Guatemala. This saved thousands of lives. So a film can make a difference. It's been my experience, but it takes a tremendous amount of effort and courage. And we were almost killed making that film, and we can talk about that later because I had to face off with guys with sunglasses and machine guns who were taking our negative and shutting our film down when we were shooting the film in Mexico. So it's dangerous. But when you get the story out there and when you tell the truth, speaking to Ramona's point, it does touch people. People do feel when they're getting the truth, and it resonates with them. And so a film, and I think everybody here has made film that have evoked social change. And I think that's what our responsibility is. in whichever way you can do it, in whichever medium that you choose, in whichever way you do it as an artist. But getting at that truth is what we need to do, and that truth is a human truth. The film is a machine for empathy, to have people walk in somebody else's shoes. And
Right.
that's what our responsibility is to do as filmmakers, so that people feel other people's humanity, to bring down the barriers that exist between people. That's what we're here to do as filmmakers.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I totally relate to everything you're saying and feel the exact same way about my own work and, specifically my latest film, which follows one Palestinian family over 3 generations and tells the story of how they've survived decades of political upheaval. And, as someone who has watched my people dehumanized for nearly a century in Hollywood films and Western media, I felt an urgent need to tell this story. And I think that what you're getting at is like the emotional truth that we are as filmmakers able to get at through the medium of cinema, like through this medium that allows, people to have empathy for people they otherwise would never get to, visit or understand or see or spend time with. And so I totally relate to that. And so to get back to, I guess, what the original question was, which is sort of how do you deal with the political situation? Is that what it was, Abby? Like the kind of the political situation surrounding the story and all of the expectations?
So we were talking about the expectation of representation in
Yes.
film, right? Because like it forces editorial choices, and we know that a film cannot carry everything. So how do you make those? How do you make those choices, and how do you navigate this pressure of representation?
I think, what I've learned over the course of my career, because I also can relate to like feeling that burden more when I was younger. And I think because of that, I didn't dive as deep as I could have. I stayed more on the surface with these drama comedies that were kind of like these immigrant drama comedies that explored issues but didn't go as deep as they could. But I was still sort of representing and I guess just kind of trying to understand who I was as a storyteller. I think that we have to just be true to ourselves. Like, I don't think that we can really be thinking about I don't think we can be thinking about what others think, is what I'm trying to say. I don't think we can be thinking about, I don't think we can be worried about how we're representing our communities. I think that probably the vast majority of us really want to do right by our communities because we do feel really misrepresented or underrepresented. So most of us are, I would even say likely all of us are coming at this from that really good intention. But if we're also maybe exploring issues that are controversial within our own community, then that's okay too, and we are going to get blowback and we just have to be prepared for that. So I think we just have to be true to what it is we have to say, meaning like what story do we want to tell, and not really compromise that vision because we're worried about, how people are going to react.
I think for like a long time, certain people of certain communities and cultures haven't had that burden of representation, right? They thought that they can enter a space and be neutral because they represented a majority in many ways. And so for me, I've always seen, like, especially in the documentary film world, that if you're viewing something through an objective lens, then you're given permission to tell that story. I think from now, I've been leaning into the subjective lens, having a point of view. I think it's important that we take our experiences and create something that's honest and has that emotional truth. I think for the longest time, I've shied away from subject matters where I felt like because I didn't represent that fully, then I couldn't make that film. And again, I think for the longest time, there was this mythology that neutrality and objectivity meant that you can enter any space and feel entitled to any space. I think, again, coming into any story and film and project and understanding what privilege that I have in order to tell this story is unique and distinct from maybe a lot of other filmmakers before who came in again with the sense that I can go into any space with entitlement. And yeah,
this is fascinating, and I think to a degree that the Gregory's interaction also opened up a new question around truth, right, and perspectives of truth in the process of filmmaking and storytelling. So I would love to dig deeper into that perspective a little bit, because I think more than noticing contradiction in perspectives, I want to go back to a phrase that Ramona used. The camera tells the truth, right? But there is also a choice as to where the camera is placed. So I want to know from each of your perspectives, what does this editorial process when it comes to story building looks like in scenarios that are already grounded in conflict?
Well, I mean, the question about, we have a lot of documentarians here as well as dramatic filmmakers, and where you place the camera. I mean, this is an extremely important question with respect to making a film, and editing and all of these things are hugely important. So a lot of that gets back to the style of the filmmaker and what their point of view, the way they want to particularly tell the story. Me personally, I always let my actors and what they do, it's out of that I determine where I put the camera. If I do the whole scene in one shot, because there's such a powerful dramatic connection between the actors that I don't want to break that up with cutting. Or I want to go to a very powerful close-up. To me, the most beautiful image in cinema is a close-up, the human close-up. As Bela Balaj said, the silent soliloquy of cinema. It's so beautiful. And sometimes, like in El Norte, that beautiful close-up of Rosa when she's begging her brother to take her with him to the North, to the United States, is such a beautiful moment, and it really moves people. You want to be in a close-up there. So whatever is the emotion of the scene, that is where you want to put the camera to enhance and capture that.
I would completely agree with that. I think, I like to distill every scene down to what is the emotion I'm looking to convey. And from that emotion comes everything, comes, what my thoughts are on the location I want to find, on the blocking, on, just all of it, where to put the camera. I mean, that it all has to kind of drive the point of the scene, the emotional point of the scene home.
Absolutely. But I'd like to hear documentarians comment on this, because it's a different process with documentaries. So I'd love to hear our documentarians talking about how they do that with the reality that's going around them, with their cinematographer, or if they work the camera, where they put the camera and how they work that.
I mean, I do a lot of verite, right? So I'm always in people's spaces. And so it all depends on where I am in the process. Because I always feel like I need to start with long lenses. I don't always get in their space right away, right? And I shoot for a long time. I shoot for like 6 months with them. So at first it's like, give them their space. And then the more they trust me, the more I then enter the space, right? And sometimes we do prime lenses and we're right up in their faces and stuff. But that's why I always say my films are really a product of my relationship to the person I'm filming. That is what you see on screen is a product of how our relationship went. I don't, it's not objective at all. I don't believe in objectivity. I mean, the very medium that we use is like lenses and cameras and editing and cutting. There's nothing objective about the form that we're using anyway. But I always feel like I need to, because I'm dealing with a real person, I need to make sure that what their intention, when they said what they said, am I following that? And I can't change that, right? I can't change it to mean something else. I'm very aware of that. But there's also that literal truth that they're saying, and that other thing, the subtext and the emotional truth. And where will that land? And how will I get out of it to get to something else? That's why we take 9 months in editing, or a year to edit. Because
Boy, 9 months, that's fast.
well, that's the budget. But it's really massaging your footage and finding out, okay, is this the best way? Is this intention? Is this a person's intention? And also my intention as a filmmaker, right? So there's always those two things that are sometimes in conflict, sometimes you're in alliance, you're in sync. But sometimes it's like, did she say that? Did she mean this? What did she mean when she said that? At what point? And of course, chronology, right? You're always, because at the end of the day, we're using the same tools in film, whether it be fiction or nonfiction, right? I mean, the idea of sculpting time and space is still what we do, even as documentary filmmakers. So we have to honor that. How do you honor that when you're telling a real story, right? And you're shifting time. It's not chronological order. And sometimes I get into trouble because I'm making a film, say for Frontline, right? But it's journalism. It's entrenched in journalism. But, even scoring is a problem for journalism because then you're enhancing the emotion. But those are the tools that you need to use in film. So sometimes it's in conflict with what we do, but, it's a tools that enhance the story. I'm all for it. And I always feel like sound design and stuff. Especially in war, right? What we hear is never really accurate anyway, because it's condensed through the mic. So when you're enhancing it in that, in the in editing and sound designing, that's more truthful actually than what you hear without all the design. I'm always trying to recapture what I heard in real life, and
Right.
or in that sort of condensed, through the lab thing. So
And Ramona, could I ask
I
you?
think it's a roundabout way. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did, and I would love to ask a follow-up because I think so far the conversation has focused on the where, right? Like where is the perspective, what is the responsibility of the filmmaker in telling a story of either representation or in a moment of conflict that might be controversial from some perspectives and necessary from other perspectives, in any way always important and always in service of amplifying our understanding of the truth. But there's also another question around when the camera is placed, right? And I want to talk about the timeliness of our perspectives as storytellers. And I wanted to ask you, because you've said before that before you left the Philippines, or that you left the Philippines before you fully grasp martial law and then returned to find people ready to talk about it. And I wonder, how does that outsider perspective shape the way you see memory and truth in your films?
Oh my gosh, it helps a lot. I mean, it helps me to be an outsider, both an outsider and insider as a documentary filmmaker, because as an outsider, I'm allowed to observe, right? And that observer stance is really key in my work. I observe. That's what I do. I observe behavior. That's what I always say. What do you do as a documentary filmmaker? I observe human behavior. It's what I do. And I think as an outsider, I'm allowed in quotes to do that, but also I'm an insider, so I can read the cues, right? The social cues. And I'm not so, I don't, I'm not so gentle with the culture. I'm not stepping on eggs. I know when to push. I know when not to push. I read the social cues. I can read the room easier. And on the practical side, I get access because I can speak the language. I understand what's happening, even if it is unsaid. Especially all the things that are unsaid are more important, right, in a culture. And it's important to read that in order to know what you're filming or what you're maybe missing in a way. Yeah, so I think it's a great place to be in that sort of liminal space, both insider and outsider.
I love that, and I have a question that is connected to some degree to this for Bao, because I think Bao's perspective might be really interesting in the specifically in the topic of truth, because I mean many of your films tackle stories that people already think they know, and you just go deeper and expose a lot of things that either confirm or contradict people's experiences with their previous version or perceived version of what the story was. So I'm really curious to hear your take on truth. And also, I would love to know what excites you about reframing these type of stories, and what kind of risks and challenges weigh the most heavily on you when you are diving in.
Well, I also wanted to answer the previous question about sort of where you place the camera, and I can sort of try to answer both questions. But I think, as the other filmmaker said in this group, it's all about the emotion. So where you point your camera is where the emotional truth is, right? And so that's, again, no matter if you're making a documentary or if you're making a fiction film, that's where the heart lies. And going to your question, I'll be about truth. Like, I'm not a journalist. I mean, a lot of people think that documentary filmmakers are all journalists, but I make that distinction that I haven't been trained in the same journalistic rigor as many journalists. And so I am always looking for that emotional truth. I mean, Werner Herzog once said, like, if you want to make a film about like facts and the factual truth, then I can go through a phone book and like read every single phone number in that phone book. But if you want me to talk about emotional truth, then let me point to this person and tell you what their dreams are. And to your question about sort of like reframing institutions and icons that I've done in my past films, I think, again, for the longest time, I don't think many filmmakers, especially BIPOC filmmakers, have been given the chance to sort of like reframe what the American myth and culture is. I made a film about Bruce Lee, and I was the first Asian American to make a feature documentary about Bruce Lee. There was 20 other films that came out. And so I was able to, use my personal experience to reframe through that film, Be Water, Bruce Lee's story as an immigrant story, as an Asian American story. I think for the longest time, people neglected him as an Asian American. And, even with a film like The Greatest Night in Pop, which is about the song We Are the World, I thought about it through the lens of like how, my immigrant parents were listening to it as a bridge to my American culture. And I think those are the things that can make our industry and our art form more expansive, when we're allowed to tell stories from different perspectives and not try to be the definitive version of a story. When I hear something is the definitive version, that always like just gives me like hesitation, because it doesn't allow space. We're creating this like field of scarcity where it's only these, certain filmmakers can just tell the story once, and you can never tell that story again. And going back to even the Vietnam War narrative, which is so important to me and my family, I think it's, for the longest time, America was using its foreign policy and using sort of the chemical warfare of napalm and Agent Orange on Vietnamese. And now through film, another form of a chemical process, that warfare is still being waged in many ways. I see it. And so how do we as filmmakers, who again have this privilege, try to find these truths and try to expand these truths of, generations who again never felt like their stories had any value?
Well, that's a really powerful perspective. And I think it also speaks to the power of discovery versus confirmation as a filmmaker, especially in documentary. So yeah, I really, really love that perspective. I want to go back to something Cherien said at the beginning of the conversation about how your Palestinian identity is the reason why you do what you do. So how do you manage, or how do you balance staying true to your values as a filmmaker versus engaging in more commercial work?
Well, I mean, funny enough, I feel like for the longest time, they were completely separate in some ways. It was like I made these two independent films to start off my career. Palestinian films have literally never been picked up by a mainstream distributor, like never, not a single one of them, not even the ones that have been nominated for Oscars. So there was never going to be the opportunity for me to break out with something more commercial. And I didn't know that at the time that I was making those films. I know that now in hindsight. And I know that very firmly now because I just went out with my third feature to sell it. And in the current, political climate, was, shocked to hear some of the things that I heard. But to put it nicely, there was a lot of fear of the subject matter. And I think that has been true my entire career. So I've had my independent film work, which I have worked very hard to try to make commercially appealing, but has never had the support from a distributor to really get into the world in any kind of a commercial way. It's never had the backing, the money, all of that. And then because with my first two features, I sort of realized like, wow, I'm not going to make any money as an independent filmmaker. I got into television and started directing and kind of directing more commercial work in that way. And in a way, I kind of had to bifurcate my career where it sort of became like, okay, well, my Palestinian identity, my stories will be told in my own films, and I will have to find a way myself to make them commercially viable someday, and then I will have my more commercial pursuits that sadly cannot involve any Palestinian identity. And that has really been the reality of my experience, which I'm sure comes as no surprise given where we're at in the world and everything that we're seeing. Where I'm at now is that I've become a distributor. I am co-distributing my current film. I decided I will absolutely not give it to a distributor to do nothing with it. I will not take the risk because the movie means far too much for me, and I went through hell to make it. We had to flee, Palestine after October of 2023. The film literally lived what most Palestinians live: war, exile. I was a refugee from home for 2 years, which is maybe a slight overstatement, but I say it to make a point. I mean, we were making a movie about what was happening as it was happening, and we had no way to know that we were going to end up in those circumstances. And so I've reached the point where I will not trust anyone with anything that I make. I will have a hand in all of it, always. I mean, from now on, I'm from development to distribution. I'm doing the whole thing, and I hope one day to buy a cinema.
I think this is something a lot of people in this call, myself included, have kind of pondered on. I think it's critically important. So this is a kind of a two-part question. The first one is just a follow-up to you. So how do you navigate this? How do you navigate changing hats? I mean, I've been wearing the same hat for 18 years every single day, so I don't know what changing hats looks like. But I'm really curious to hear about your experience. And what do you wish you knew when you started distributing your own films that I think emerging filmmakers should know?
I mean, the times have changed so radically from the time that I started. But funny enough, even when I started with my first film, America, in 2009, I was selling a film during a recession. The entire world economy had just collapsed. And it was really the beginning of what we're seeing now in distribution, meaning that everything from that moment just contracted and contracted and contracted. And I'm not talking about television and the streaming wars. I'm talking really about film, and I'm talking about independent film and how the money, it was sort of like everything just became less and less and less. Budgets shrank, everything. So now we find ourselves in a landscape where everything is contracting, where the bottom is falling out of distribution, where many films are not getting distribution, and many filmmakers are having to figure out distribution on their own. More filmmakers than you can imagine are doing direct distribution. I had no idea because I'd been working after my first two features. I worked in television for 7 years and then got back into features. So I think that at this point as filmmakers, we have no choice really but to know as much as we can about the entire pipeline. And I feel like we're moving into an era where it is going to be more about artist to audience. And it should be, frankly, because there's far too many middlemen taking massive percentages, and the filmmaking team sees nothing at the end of the day. Even if the movie is successful, that model does not work anymore. Even the studios are admitting that that model doesn't work anymore. So it's a dinosaur. It's time to say goodbye. It's gone. And you look at like a studio like Angel Studios. Well, they disrupted the entire movie industry. 3 Idaho potato farmers disrupted Hollywood. And they took on their first film release was a child sex trafficking film that Hollywood wouldn't touch. And they said, you know what? This is an important movie and people need to know about this. They need to know the signs of sex trafficking so that this can be stopped. And that movie made $25 million at the box office. So I think right now there's a lot of space for filmmakers to really get innovative and to really like get into the trenches of distribution and really figure it out, because it's not rocket science. It's a lot of work, but it's not rocket science. And so as far as the changing hats, like, I write, direct, I act, and now I distribute. And probably I'll be adding more to that at some point. It just is the way that it is now. Like, and you don't have to do all of those things. But, I think when you are a creative person, it really behooves you to understand the business side as much as possible, because otherwise you will be taken advantage of. And that's just the reality of this industry, especially when you come from like communities like we do. So I think for me, it's about percentages of time. Right now I'm spending 100% of my time releasing my current film. So between the Academy Awards campaign and the theatrical planning, all of that, all of the different releases in the different territories, that's what I'm doing. Every now and then I have like 10% of my time I can write. But it's really, I start to think about it in terms of percentages. Like, hopefully after this movie's released, I can go back to 75% creative time and maybe 25% thinking about how I can really build my audience. Because I do think that as artists, we have to be thinking about how to build our own audiences. I just don't think that we can rely on distributors the way that we did in the past.
This really reminds me very, very strongly about when, I was a young filmmaker and, coming out of film school, and I'd done my first 16 millimeter feature. And there was this whole coming together of independent filmmakers, Lone Rangers all around the country, because all with the same complaint, all with the same thing, that the studio system at the time in the 1980s, late 70s and early 80s, absolutely was not interested in doing our stories. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the independent feature project happened and we all came together, and that was me and those Spike Lee and John Sayles and Joan Mecklin Silver and, all of these, Charles Burnett and all of these independent filmmakers, because African-American stories weren't being told, Latino stories, women's stories weren't being told, gay stories, all of these stories were not being told and they needed to be told. And so our attitude was, fuck Hollywood, forget Hollywood. We're going to find alternate sources of financing, alternate sources of distribution. All right. We had nothing, but somehow or other, this movement started. Okay. And El Norte, and then in 1984, that was the big breakthrough year, because El Norte was released, Testament was released, Spinal Tap was released, Stranger Than Paradise was released, Brother from Another Planet was released. They were all released. And at that time, there was this distribution network for foreign films. And these films keyed into that, and they made money and they were successful. And then of course, then Robert Redford got involved and started Sundance, because there was this thing happening, because there was this energy happening with young filmmakers who had all these stories that needed to be told and that the establishment wasn't telling. All right. And things really changed. Mm-hmm. So that energy, I always think about that. And, Sandra Schulberg started all of this, and she has the Indie Collect movement now that is about preserving all of these early films that were done, independent cinema. And I keep saying, and I did a big event with them, with the Rescue Fest, that energy we need again.
Yeah.
Independent filmmakers have to get together again. Latino filmmakers have to get together to get our stories told because they don't want to tell Latino stories, especially now with the Trump administration. I mean, they've canceled every Latino filmmaker I know. Every Latino project's been canceled, because nobody wants to do anything positive about Latinos. This doesn't fit in, they're all afraid of the administration. So with Palestinian stories, with, Filipino, every kind of story that we need, we all have to get together, I think, and re-energize what the energy that happened with the Independent Film Feature Project. And then subsequently I started Film Independent, and Film Independent is still there, and they're a good base to work with because they have a lot of wonderful programs. But we need to re-energize, rebirth the independent film energy with the new filmmakers today. And the thing that happened was that as long as we were independent, just independent from each other, and working on our own, we did not get anywhere. It is when we all came together, right? That created an energy, just the very act. I was talking to Sandra about this recently. Just the very act of people coming together created an energy, and then things started to happen, right? So my big pitch to all of you and to all filmmakers who are going through what we're all going through now with trying to get our stories told is that we need to rebirth that energy and go, all right, the establishment, the streamers, all this, they're just not doing it. And we have to find some alternate method because they've gotten so conservative. And this is what happened in the 80s. Because the mainstream got so conservative, it created a vacuum that we filled. That vacuum exists again, and we need to fill it.
I love
the first word that says, "Se puede." Can we do it? Sí se puede. Yes, we can.
I really love this, Gregory. And let me ask you a follow-up question, because I've had conversations over the past 6 months around what does it mean to do that today, right? And not only in an era where people are being punished for exercising their free speech, and people are being deported and arrested for a long period of time for openly protesting, even if doing so in a pacific, nonviolent way. But I think you're a really good reference for this conversation, because even though obviously there are different things impacting the current reality, like the use of AI for potential surveillance and things like that, and the new coalition that tech companies and the government are building around censorship and suppression of speech. Well, again, you're a reference precisely because El Norte, even though now is seen as a critical landmark, at the time, involved a lot of political risk and a lot of political danger, and it was logistically daunting. And I know you had almost no resources. So what do you think the Gregory from that day should tell or could tell the filmmakers that want to take those political risks in 2025 and beyond?
Well, I think that the most important thing with all filmmaking and with independent filmmaking is passion. You must have passion. If you have passion, and if you have a story within you that's burning, that you have to get out, you will find a way to get it out. And you must overcome your fear, because everything that you're talking about, well, we're afraid of AI, we're afraid of the administration, we're afraid. Fear rules the world. You must overcome your fear. All right. And that is a personal thing. You have to do two things. You have to fight what's out there, but you also have to break the chains within. And you have to have what we say in Spanish, ganas. You've got to have the desire to do it. And the next thing you need is you have to find like-minded people who share that same passion to come together. And that creates energy for you to move forward, because you need to support each other. We all supported each other when we were making films, those films from the 80s, the independent film movement. Everybody was supporting each other and talking to each other. We were meeting and we were having events together, and that energized us. So unity With unity, there is strength. As we say in Spanish, el pueblo unido jamás será vencido. Right? When you're united, you're victorious. So you have to have passion, you have to overcome your fear, and you need unity. And if you have those three things, you will succeed. We can succeed.
I love that. Cherien, I want to take us back to something you were saying earlier around your passion and kind of following up on Gregory about your passion, because I think it also comes with a great deal of foresight and insight. For instance, like All That's Left of You came at a moment where Palestinian stories are urgent. And it's meeting the moment in such an important and critical way. And I'm really curious to hear from you, what kind of stories are you compelled to tell next?
Oh, wow. I have to admit that I go back and forth. Like I have so many stories that I want to tell. And I'm waiting I have a couple that have risen to the top, but I worked so hard on this movie, and we had to re-prep the entire film. We prepped it in Palestine, and then we had to flee 2 weeks before shooting, and then we had to re-prep the entire film. I literally on this movie felt like I was being tortured. I was like, someone is laughing right now. They're just like, no, you built the house in the wrong place and build it over here. Like I just literally felt like I was in, and I started to laugh about it. It honestly felt like some kind of I don't know, a spiritual like experience, because it was just insane, the number of obstacles. And then I realized, no, this is actually the Palestinian experience. I think that I've had many reactions to that experience, and my first reaction was like, get me as far away from this as possible. Like, I wanted to like completely go in the other direction. But of course, that's not what I want to do. I'm taking the movie out into the world. I'm seeing like the unbelievable impact it's having on people. It's like opening people's hearts. It's creating empathy, in people who maybe didn't otherwise have it or didn't really think about it. They weren't really thinking about the situation. It's providing like an emotional education for people, is how someone put it. And so then that makes me go, okay, well, maybe I should think about this other Palestinian story. But I am definitely like this film and my experiences with this film. I mean, I will say, despite the difficulties and saying that at one point I felt tortured, I mean, it's a little bit like, didn't Bruce Lee say, be like water? I literally feel like I had to be like water with this film. Like these obstacles, like I just had to flow with them and figure out how to make them work for me. And that's the way in which I felt like it was a little bit of like a spiritual, experience, because it was just like, okay, this is not really an obstacle. This is going to be like this is going to help me make the movie that much better. And it was at every step of the way, I had to like watch my attitude, look at the obstacle, figure out how to make it work. So I think that my ambitions grew by leaps and bounds after that, because I just was like, well, if I can do this, I can do anything. And I wish I knew that when I was younger. And I would say to my younger self, and I kind of knew this when I was younger, but I think every up and coming filmmaker just needs to hear it and needs to repeat it to themselves. Do not wait for someone to give you permission.
This is really powerful. And I mean, so far in the conversation, we've had this approach to kind of the David and Goliath dynamic between either storytellers and the government or filmmakers and the film industry as a whole. About, I think you also have another layer of this that I'm really curious to understand from your perspective, because I mean, you've obviously told stories that inevitably, poke a hole or open a new window, as I was saying earlier, into stories or people already knew or already thought they knew. In a lot of these cases, I mean, obviously in the case of Bruce Lee, that's a pretty good example, but also in the case of Michael Jackson and all the celebrities and the impact of We Are the World and all of that, has been seen through many layers of corporate advertisement and corporate authority on what the narrative is supposed to look like or sound like. And then you open this window. How has your dynamic been in interacting or engaging in dialogue with powerful institutions? So what has surprised you the most, or what have you learned from that?
That's a great question. I mean, I think for me, I'm in the films that I make and the stories that I want to tell, I'm trying to deconstruct some of those institutions and mythologies. I think, again, Bruce Lee for the longest time was just a mythical figure in many people's minds. He wasn't a human being. And so when you can deconstruct that myth, you make him something more than a symbol. He becomes something that you can build proximity with, and an individual that you can build proximity with. And I think I was very fortunate that film came, or well, I shouldn't say fortunate, but it was coincidental. The film came out it came out in the middle of COVID, and it came out 2 weeks after George Floyd had been murdered. And this was a moment of reckoning in our country, of racial reckoning, of political reckoning. And I was like, what? I felt like my film couldn't say anything about that moment. And I felt like strange because I was like going on this weird, like, digital press tour with the film. When I made the film, there's all these connections to Bruce Lee's sort of presence as power, how his representation empowered a lot of people, individuals in the Asian American community, also in solidarity with the African American community and the civil rights movement. And once that film came out, a lot of activists came to me and they said how that film was a catharsis for them after going through sort of the fires of protest and reckoning. And so I think about, again, it was such a big moment for the world and for our country, that May, June of 2020 in many ways. And to think that we can humanize that moment into our heroes and these stories that we can connect with in so many ways, I think, again, is the power of what we do, is creating that proximity from taking something that's myth and turning it into memory in some ways.
That's really, really, really helpful and really good insight. And I think this is something that probably everybody in this call can, to some degree, connect to. I mean, I would assume that Cherien also deals with a lot of these dialogues in your own process of distributing and marketing and like wearing these many hats. And in your case, Gregory, also you're involved with so many organizations and institutions outside of your own storytelling practice that I'm curious. I'm curious to learn more about how do you navigate this kind of dual identity, one as a storyteller, but also as a regular citizen, as a regular participant in this world that may or may not affect you directly. And this is an open question for everybody.
My feeling is that in addition to the films that I've made, like I talked about starting Film Independent, and of course I was involved with the Sundance Institute, and then I was a governor in the Motion Picture Academy when we were trying to do the A2020 movement in the Motion Picture Academy, reforming the Academy to allow more diverse membership and more international membership. And I was one of the people that was spearheading that effort on the part of the Academy. And God bless, we got so many filmmakers, women filmmakers, filmmakers of color, filmmakers from diverse backgrounds, both from the United States and internationally, in the Academy at that particular period. And it was transformative because this is, because the Film Academy was obviously had to change in order to reflect what was going on in the world. The United States was changing, the film industry was changing, more internationalizing, and the Academy had this. And now it's a very different Academy than it was before, with many voters from international and many voters from underserviced communities and gender. So I'm very proud of the fact that I was part of that. I'm very proud of the fact that I started the Film Independent organization, which has been so important for independent cinema through the years. And I see that as part of my responsibility, because when I see something that injustice, not only in the subject matters of the films that I'm making, like El Norte or Selena, but also when I see this disparity and injustice in the mechanisms to get films made and the way they are evaluated and seen, then I try to do whatever I can in order to affect that system, to make it better and to improve it. Unfortunately, we're going through a retrograde period now. A few years ago, things were very different. I think everybody will admit to that in terms of the diversification of the film industry, in terms of theme and filmmakers that were being supported. Now, it's being backed off of for obvious reasons. But I think that this is a wave that will change again. So I think that it is part of our responsibility as filmmakers to affect the filmmaking process in the film industry to the best of our ability.
Cherien, Ramona, Bao, Gregory, what a pleasure to be here with the four of you. I love this window into your minds. Thank you for your generosity and for your time, and for everyone in the conversation joining us today, right? Either people commenting on the chat or people just seeing this after this is recorded and posted online. Thank you so much for joining us. Please reach out, and looking forward to the next opportunity.
A huge thank you to Abi and everyone on today's panel for another impactful conversation on the art of filmmaking. As I mentioned up top, this episode is part of Antigravity Academy satellite sessions. These are free conversations with high-level individuals in film and TV to make resources and information available to as many up-and-coming filmmakers as possible. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, be sure you're subscribed to Dolby Creator Talks. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about what we do at Dolby Creator Lab, head on over to dolbycreatorlab.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of the show, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer, editor, and guest host today is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Kahn. Thanks for joining us.